Motivation. If you want to describe people with this personality trait, this is the best word you will find. People with high extraversion or extraversion tend to be seen as very enthusiastic, very social, as active people, and all of this has to do with the brain activation of these people. Extroverts have a great activation in their brains in what is called the dopaminergic zone. That is, the brain pathways that act for dopamine, the neurotransmitter of pleasure, tend to be greater in these people. In other words, it is to say that extroverted people are happier, more joyful, and that this is a personality trait related to life satisfactions and positive emotions in general. Robert Sapolsky, a great biologist and neuroscientist, describes how dopamine is not a simple neurotransmitter of pleasure, but of the anticipation of a possible pleasure or a possible reward. That is, when dopamine acts on your brain, it is being activated before you gain something, rather than after you have gained that thing, so to speak. This is what some Greek philosophers or Clovis de Barros Filho called love, because it would be like saying that you only love, so to speak, while you lack something. And after you have it and you have achieved it, it is very likely that you will start wanting something else and something different. And this is a perfect description of extroversion, because they are always motivated to achieve things and the possibility of having a new reward. Extroverts are very easily motivated by things like money, sexuality, and anything that causes excitement, so to speak. There are people who are very driven to achieve something, even if the reward is only in their heads. But before that, we need to understand what motivation really is. And one of the ways we can use to conceptualize what human motivation is by the so-called inverted U-curve. It represents the way dopamine acts in our brains, which will be as follows. First, there's a stimuli, usually a sensory stimuli, whether through sight, hearing, imagination, or even intuition. And with that, positive emotions appear to guide this stimuli towards a defined objective or object. For example, if you feel hungry, dopamine will be activated to lead you to get food. And if you manage to eat, then the brain circuits that were activated before you eating that food will become larger and stronger and will be bathed in dopamine, so to speak, causing them to be activated again the next time you are hungry, or even when you see a sandwich, for example. This effect can also be called conditioning, and is what behaviorist psychologists use on various types of animals. They made rats press buttons and bars just to get food. They made pigeons play ping pong and many other things. But how can you use this in your life? Well, in a way, it seems very easy, right? It will be just a case of starting to eat a candy every time you do anything good. Well, more or less. Humans are obviously not rats, much less pigeons. So what we need to reward our activities ends up being much more complex than a simple candy. Since extroversion has biological characteristics, not everyone gets the same effects so easily. People with low extroversion tend to be shy, quieter, more reserved, and more serious. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the excitement that an extrovert has in some areas of their lives. In fact, personality traits are on a percentile spectrum that goes from a 0 to a 100. So most people tend to fall somewhere in the middle with at least 16% of extroversion, or 40%. Knowing which areas in your life you are an extroverted in can help you a lot in knowing which behaviors are creating motivations in you. Many people are motivated by food, by video games, by sex, and even work, as we will see in another video. Therefore, when you do an activity that you aim to gain a reward from, such as starting to train, going on a diet, getting to college, sitting down to do a job or just to study, in your brain, a neurotransmitter called noradrenaline accumulates in what are called the glial neurons, one of the main activation centers of the brain. And when these neurotransmitters accumulate too much in those regions and the person does not see any apparent achievement, does not see they are progressing with that they are not having an evolution, they start to give up. They start to give up with this accumulate because of this accumulation of noradrenaline in the brain. In other words, if you struggle too much, if you try too much, if you work, if you study too much, you will end up just giving up. But there is a way to reverse this, which is by starting to see an evolution in your progress and starting to enjoy the activities you are doing, starting to having fun instead of just directing yourself so objectively to a specific end. In other words, when dopamine starts to be activated, it prevents this increase in noradrenaline, making the person continue to be motivated to do the things that she was doing before. Therefore, if you have a goal in your life, even more important than not giving up is to feel some pleasure in this activity you are doing. Because otherwise, your brain will start to punish you. And if you start doing an activity that is not related to that one you are striving for and fighting to achieve, so you go like this instead of this, it is likely that dopamine that could be helping you to be motivated to this other goal is being used in other neural circuits. In other words, if you start weight training and at the same time you start to reward yourself for activities that are not associated with that, such as smoking, drinking, and having negative health behaviors, it is very likely that you will be using very different parts of your brain that are not connected to each other. So while you focus on working out and accumulating norepinephrine or noradrenaline, therefore, the dopamine that could help you stay motivated in this activity is being thrown away, so to speak, on other things that you shouldn't be doing if you wanted to stay focused and motivated in this goal. Learning to integrate and pair these things in a way that makes sense is very important. It is as if you were simultaneously integrating and putting your own brain together to function as a system in a way that makes sense to you. For example, imagine that, I don't know, you like to watch videos on YouTube and at the same time you like training. So by the time you are watching videos on YouTube, you like training, you are not training. But what could you do? Maybe you could start watching videos on how to train better, how to stay motivated in your training. So even when you are doing something that is not directly related to this, you are also doing things that in a way could help you and reinforcing these things that will help you to achieve this other goal you have. Now, if you want to know how to do this better, I recommend you to go to a therapist. He will probably help you doing this. But some other interesting things about extroversion are that some articles show how it's positively related to sexual activity and risky sexual behavior as well, and negatively related to symptoms of dysfunction. That is, extroverted people tend to have more sex, but they also tend to be more impulsive about it. Other studies also say that despite being associated with greater sexual satisfaction, people with this personality trait are also those who show lower tendencies towards fidelity, suggesting that because an extrovert gets excited very easily by external stimuli, he or she can act in a very impulsive way at times. In other words, having high dopamine is great for being motivated to do certain behaviors, but at the same time, it also makes people become very impulsive and not know how to choose the best actions to take. Therefore, it is very important to differentiate extremely high extroversion from other psychopathologies, such as histrionic personality disorder, for example. People with this disorder use their physical appearance a lot to impress other people, as Darwin's sexual selection, in a sense, where a peacock likes to show off his feathers, even though the feathers are of no use of the peacock and actually cause harm to it because of the weight and because of attracting predators. And histrionic people may act inappropriately, seductively, and provocatively just to get attention. These are things that trigger dopamine to be activated in the brain. And people with bipolar disorder also have very similar traits. They end up having a very excited mood, very fast thoughts, euphoria, and a lot of impulsivity. However, we can say that those with histrionic personality tend to have high levels of extroversion, and not that all people with extroversion are histrionic. And histrionic personality disorder is more related to that way a person deals with life and is closely linked to their biology and not to a specific state they are feeling at the moment. In the case of bipolar disorder, which is more temporary, sometimes the person becomes maniac, overly excited and stimulated, and sometimes they become depressed. The biology of these cases is much more specific, and introverted people can also end up being bipolar, for example. Ultimately, this is the big difference between personality traits and mental illnesses. While a personality disorder can be something that a person suffers from in a dysfunctional way, a personality trait is just something that shows how a person is, so to speak, as if it were a pattern of behavior that remains stable throughout their life. It is not possible to change a personality trait, but it is possible to understand them and know how to best use them. In the next video, we will see more about neuroticism, which is, in fact, the opposite trait of extroversion.